You ever have somebody look at you like they already know exactly who you are, and in that split second you can feel they are completely wrong, but their version of you is the one that suddenly matters? That was my Thursday night at a gas station on the south side of Chicago. Me in a gray hoodie, hand on the pump, and a young cop yelling at me like I had just stolen my own car. My name is Nathaniel D. Harlan. I am a United States District Judge for the Northern District of Illinois, and in the 7 minutes that followed, he managed to hand his city a $9.4 million problem and pretty much end his career just because he could not see past the fact that I was a black man by a Mercedes. You know what I mean? Earlier that day, I had been in a very different room. I was on the bench in a dark suit and a robe that feels heavier on some days than others, listening to lawyers argue about the death of a 16-year-old who matched a description. His mother sat clutching a school photo like it might hold her son together somehow, and the city tried to hide behind legal buzzwords. I denied qualified immunity in that case, told them they were going to have to answer for what happened. And when the courtroom emptied, I went back to chambers and stared at the old photo on my desk. My father in his CPD uniform, broad-shouldered and proud, taken a couple weeks before a nervous man with a gun misread him in a parking lot, and my father never walked through our front door again. So yes, I know what it looks like when fear in a uniform meets a black man in a parking lot. I folded my robe, loosened my tie, pulled on my beat-up gray Northwestern hoodie, and walked through a quiet courthouse, calling my mother like I always do after a hard day. She talked about her neighbor's barking dog, and whether I was eating enough vegetables, and if that nice lady lawyer had called again. I did not tell her about the boy or the ruling or what it does to you to look into another grieving mother's face. I just said, "Ma, I am on my way. I just need to stop for gas." Because sometimes you keep the heaviest parts of your day off, the people whose hearts are already tired. 10 minutes later, I was at Northside Fuel Mart, the kind of place with buzzing lights and a coffee machine that looks like it has seen things. I swiped my card, started the pump, scrolled through notes on my phone. If I glanced around, that was just habit from years on the bench. You learn to read rooms even when the room is a parking lot. Inside the glass behind the counter was a young clerk named Aaliyah Washington. I did not know her name then, I just knew there was someone behind the register. But later, when this turned into a case with my name on it, I would hear her describe the same few minutes from her side. She saw an older black man in a hoodie by a black Mercedes GLE standing there longer than she expected, looking around every now and then, and her stomach clenched. She grew up in the suburbs where folks talk about safety and good neighborhoods in a way that always seems to point in the same direction, where certain faces equal belong and certain faces equal watch him, even if nobody says it out loud. Her manager drilled one line into her head every shift: if something feels off, report it, better safe than sorry. So she did what people do now. She texted her friends. "There is this black guy at pump 4, she wrote. "Nice car, hoodie, been there a while, keeps looking around, I feel weird." They did not know me either, but they knew that feeling. "Call the cops," one said. "You are alone, be careful," another added. "Let CPD handle it." Aaliyah hesitated for a second, remembering news stories and class discussions about bias, but fear and doing the right thing got braided together in her head, and she picked up the store phone and dialed 911. What she told the dispatcher was basically a description of her discomfort. Black male, maybe 50s, gray hoodie next to a black Mercedes, been out there for a while looking around. She did not think the car belonged to him. She never claimed I broke a window or waved a gun or yelled at anyone. But the system turned "I feel weird" into possible stolen vehicle in progress, and that phrase hit a whole different set of switches. A few miles away, Officer Kyle T. Brennan was sitting in his squad car, staring at his reflection in the windshield and trying not to think about his life falling apart. I learned all the details later from his file and from his testimony, but it explains a lot about the way he came at me. Late 20s, marriage, recently blown up, a little daughter. He now only saw, with a court monitor in the room, over $30,000 in debt, 4 sustained complaints in 18 months for force and for bias and for stops that went sideways. Supervisors writing needs coaching and follow-up, but somehow nobody pulling him off solo patrol. He was living on caffeine denial, and the idea that the uniform still proved he was one of the good guys, even though the job kept dragging his fear and insecurity out into the open. When dispatch said, "Possible stolen vehicle, black male, high-value SUV caller, feels unsafe, priority response," It sounded to him like a chance to be in control for once. He did not call back with questions like, "Is there broken glass?" or "Did anyone see a weapon?" He hit his lights, hit the gas, and headed for me, like this call was going to prove something to the world. Out at the pump, my gas clicked off and I was wrapping up my call with my mother, listening to her tell that dog story one last time. I said, "Love you." Put my phone in my pocket and reached for my wallet. And that is when red and blue light painted the side of my SUV like a warning. Let me tell you, I know the Constitution better than most people will ever need to, but my body did not reach for a law book in that moment. It reached for memories. My shoulders tightened, my breath caught for a beat, and then I made myself move, slow, calm, deliberate, no sudden anything. Kyle came in, crooked, half blocking the lane, jumped out with his hand way closer to his gun than to his common sense. He did not walk up and observe, he charged like a linebacker. "Driver, kill the engine and step out right now, hands where I can see them, do it now," he shouted. The engine was already off. I was already out of the car. That told me everything I needed to know about how much he had really taken in. I turned around slowly, hands visible, and for a second it was just the two of us in that harsh white light, me in a hoodie, him in a uniform, and I could hear exactly what his voice was hiding. On top it was loud, but underneath it was shaking. That is the sound of fear trying to pretend it is authority. "Officer," I said, keeping my voice low and steady so it did not add fuel to his fire, "you are going to lower your weapon and you are going to explain the basis for this stop." To his ears that probably sounded like a challenge. To mine it was basic procedure. "Possible stolen vehicle," he snapped back, "license and registration, step away from the car." "No," I told him, still calm, "you do not have reasonable articulable suspicion to detain me. A nervous phone call is not enough for a lawful stop, not under the Fourth Amendment, not in my courtroom, not in this parking lot." I watched that phrase, reasonable articulable suspicion, hit him like a foreign word he was supposed to know but could not quite translate. His jaw clenched, his shoulders rose, his hand moved even closer to his weapon. In that instant I knew I was standing on a line my father had stood on once, and I promised myself I was not going to join him on the wrong side of history if I could help it. So I did the one thing I still had control over. I slowed everything down. "Listen carefully," I said loud enough for that tiny camera on his chest to catch it. "I am going to reach into my right pocket, and I am going to pull out my identification. You are not going to shoot me for pumping gas because that is all that is happening here. Keep your hands where I can see them." He barked again, but he did not close the distance, and that tiny bit of space was enough. I reached in, pulled out my wallet, opened it, and held it up so he and that lens both had a clear look at the gold federal credentials inside. "My name is Nathaniel Darius Harlan," I said, "United States District Judge, Northern District of Illinois. You have just carried out an unconstitutional stop on a federal judge on camera based on nothing more than a scared phone call. You are going to stand down right now. That is not a suggestion, that is an order under the same law you swore to uphold." You could almost see his stomach drop. His eyes went wide, his mouth opened like he was searching for the right excuse and could not find one. "Wait, you are a judge," he stammered, like maybe there was a chance I was making it up. I did not waste time on that. I pulled my phone back out, called the watch commander, and said, "This is Judge Harlan. I am at Northside Fuel Mart. I have just been unlawfully detained at gunpoint by one of your officers. I want a supervisor here now, and I want your assurance that body cam dispatch audio, MDT logs, everything tied to this stop is preserved in full. No edits, no gaps, no malfunctions, and that chain of custody will be available for review." Inside the glass, Aaliyah was watching with her hands over her face. She could not make out every word, but "federal judge" and "unlawful" carried just fine, even through cheap windows. And in that moment, whatever story she had told herself about just being careful broke wide open. Sergeant Elena Ramirez pulled in a couple of minutes later, stepped out, saw me, and I watched the blood drain from her face. "Your Honor, are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" she asked. "I am not hurt," I told her, "but what happened here is not all right. I want your word that every second of this encounter is preserved and reported. If this is how your officer behaves when the person he stops is a federal judge, imagine what he does on nights when the person is just a kid or a worker heading home." She promised, turned to Kyle, and in a voice that was quiet but sharp asked, "What did you do?" He stared at the pavement like he could disappear into it. Before I left, I walked close enough that only he could really hear me and said, "Officer Brennan, the law exists to restrain your fear, not to hand it a weapon. Tonight you let fear drive this whole thing. There are going to be consequences." 9 months later there were. I was back in a federal courtroom, but this time I was sitting at the plaintiff's table under a caption that read, "Harlan v. City of Chicago and Officer Kyle T. Brennan." The city tried hard to keep it quiet. 5 million, then 6, then 7 in settlement, offers each one tied to a confidentiality clause and a neat little sentence about no admission of liability. Every time my lawyer asked if I was sure about saying no, and every time I told her the same thing, "I have a salary, I am not starving. What I need is a public record. If I sell my story to silence, how do I look the next mother in the eye when her child gets treated worse than I was?" The case landed in front of Judge Rebecca L. Goldstein, who has zero interest in drama. On day one, she looked at both sides and said, "We are going to move efficiently. No speeches disguised as questions, no theatrics. Facts only." During the trial, I watched Aaliyah on the stand, hands laced together, voice shaking, as she admitted she never saw me break into the car, never saw a weapon, never heard me raise my voice, that she called because I felt off, and because her friends and her training told her to. When my attorney asked, "If that man at the pump had been white in khakis and a polo, do you honestly think you would have made that call?" She sat in silence for a long moment and finally whispered, "Probably not." And the whole room felt that truth land. Kyle looked smaller on the stand than he had at the pump. His suit was too big. His eyes stayed on the microphone. Under questioning, he admitted the dispatch call did not include a crime, that I never resisted, never shouted, never threatened him, that he drew his gun because he was trying to be safe. Judge Goldstein cut in calm but icy and said, "Officer safety is not a blanket excuse for violating the Constitution," and you could see him flinch like the words had weight. When it was my turn, I told the jury why I refused private settlements. I told them about that 16-year-old, about my father, about every person who had stood in front of my bench asking how something like this could happen. And I said, if this can happen to me, a federal judge in my own city, imagine how it looks for people who do not have titles or lawyers. I did not file this just for me. I filed it because fear keeps being mistaken for procedure, and somebody has to say enough in a way the city cannot ignore. After 9 days, the jury went out, and 3 hours and some change later they came back. The foreperson read the verdict in favor of the plaintiff: compensatory damages, 5.4 million, punitive damages, 4 million. I did not fist pump, I just felt my shoulders finally drop. Then Judge Goldstein added that qualified immunity was denied, and Kyle Brennan was personally liable for $750,000, and he just folded in on himself. Yeah, that happened. In the months after the city finally opened up, old files, rewrote training materials, shuffled some supervisors out of comfortable chairs, created a unit to keep an eye on officers who were headed for the cliff before they jumped. Kyle lost his badge, his pension, his job. From what came out in post-judgment filings, he moved back into his father's basement, took a night security job, and tried to drink away the replay in his head. Aaliyah lost her job at the gas station, got sued separately over that 911 call, paid a $45,000 settlement, took time off school, started therapy, started doing the hard work of unlearning some of what she had been taught about who looks safe. I took a chunk of that money and put it into a scholarship in my father's name for children of officers killed in the line of duty, because I still believe accountability and respect for good policing can live in the same house. I went back to the bench with a little less patience for excuses and a lot more patience for victims. I do not mention the gas station in court, but it is there with me every time someone says, "matched a description." About 10 months after the verdict, I pulled into that same station because my tank was low. There was a new coffee shop across the lot, and through the window I saw Aaliyah in an apron making drinks, trying to build something different with her life. She looked up, saw me, froze, and I gave her a small, tired half smile. Not exactly forgiveness, not punishment either, just acknowledgement. She nodded back and went back to work, because that is what life does. It keeps going even with scars. People in this city still argue about that case. Some say I destroyed a young officer's life. Some say the city got off easy. Some say a scared clerk paid too big a price. All I know is fear is expensive, and when we let it drive policy and patrol cars instead of facts and training, regular people end up footing the bill. That night, it was me, Kyle, and Aaliyah at a gas pump under bad lighting. Next time, it could be you or someone you love. So I want to hear what you think. Was the verdict fair, too harsh, too soft? Have you ever had someone look at you and decide you were a problem before you opened your mouth? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Argue with me if you need to share your own story if you have one. Hit like if you stayed with me to the end. Subscribe if you want more real stories from the messy space between law and life, and share this with somebody who still thinks better safe than sorry never hurts anyone, because now you know better, and deep down, so do they.